Mr. Dheeraj is a serial entrepreneur and intrapreneur, having launched several companies independently as well as large institutions. Among other things, he is the co-founder of Arogya Finance, a financing venture which lends to those who are unable to afford or pay for their family's healthcare expenses. Until recently, Dheeraj was the head of business design India at IDEO, where he was part of a core team of people which helped establish the office in India. Prior to IDEO, Dheeraj worked at InnoSight Ventures, where he was focused on building businesses in India. Welcome, Dheeraj. Accompanying him for the presentation is Mr. Saurabh Gupta, Managing Director, Human Factors International India. Mr. Saurabh, an alumnus of National Institute of Design, Ahmedabad, has worked in the usability and user experience field since 2003. Apart from his key contributions towards evangelizing UX, Saurabh is known in the industry for his strategic insights and guidance towards building pragmatic user experience design solutions for clients with a clear focus on meeting business goals and increasing customer satisfaction. Over the last 10 years at HFI, Saurabh has directed and mentored clients across the globe for consulting projects ranging from institutionalization of user experience, digital strategy visioning, product ideation, usability evaluation reports, user interface structures to usability testing. Welcome, Saurabh.
Thanks. First of all, thanks for having us here. And just one clarification, I think when the bio started, it said with IDEO right now. I was with IDEO until earlier this year, and now I am no longer, which depending on your view can either be good or bad. So I'm no longer a consultant, now a practitioner, which some people like better. So the title of this session is Design Thinking and Gamification. We're not actually going to focus too much on gamification. There's a session after this where there's a professor from Wharton who will be talking about gamification. Given that, we thought, let's not try to compete with that. That's a battle we'll clearly lose. So we're going to focus more on design thinking and then relate that to this session by talking about design thinking and how it applies to digital media. And that's where Saurabh will come in. Yeah? Before we go further, or before we begin rather, let me talk about this word design. Yeah, now design, I wish this process that I'm going to talk to you about today, the process that IDEO espouses, that a lot of people follow, was not called design thinking. Yeah, because it confuses people, and let me tell you why. Design is a common word. We all understand it. We all have a preconceived notion of what it is. For most of it, it's a shiny product. It's a nice car. It's nice clothes. It's something that's shiny, maybe has a lot of curves to it. Maybe it's in a showcase somewhere. But that's where it stops, right? It stops at that aesthetic layer. Now, design thinking is something else entirely. What this says is, yeah, the aesthetics is one outcome of this process, but let's focus more on the process of designing, design thinking. Think about let's talk about how designers think, take that process, turn it into some sort of repeatable methodology, and then apply that to other problems. And that's what this design thinking is. So the link actually comes from the fact that we're taking a designer's brain and turning it into a process. It does have to do with aesthetics, but not exclusively. It applies to, so you can use it to design a better phone, you can use it to design a better experience. So what should the inside of this auditorium feel like? What should a hotel lobby feel like? You can use it to design digital interactions better. So you can use it to design user interfaces better, and I'll go into that in a second. Yeah. At a high level, at a very, very sort of 10,000-foot level, this is the process that a designer follows, right? So I've been talking to you so much about design thinking, being a process that, let's take a designer's brain and put it on a process. So this is roughly what a good designer would do. Yeah, you'll see different versions of this from different people. 5, 4, 6, 10, as many steps as you want, as few steps as you want. The idea is you begin with developing some sort of empathy, and then you go from there. And that happens to be the most important step, actually, in this process, which is actually developing empathy. So what a good designer would do, right? So let's say a good designer comes to me and says, help me design the next iPhone, or help me design the iPhone. Let's say he came to me not today, but for argument's sake, let's say he came to me 10 years ago. Yeah, back then I was using a BlackBerry. What I could have given him was maybe a better BlackBerry, but I would have never been able to give him the iPhone, right? It just wouldn't have happened. Especially if he or she just followed, sort of the regular market research approach by asking what features do you want, what features don't you want, what do you want to be able to do with it, what color do you want it to be, how much should it weigh? They'll never get to something as disruptive as this. Yeah, so how do you get to that? To get to that, you actually have to get inside my head and figure out what works for me, what doesn't work for me, even if I can't verbalize it to you on my own. And to enable that, what this process has done is actually borrowed from other disciplines. Yeah, so, and this in itself has actually become a very big subset of design thinking. It's called ethnography, generally. In design thinking, we call it human factors. The idea is, let's figure out the human factor. Let's figure out the human side. Let's figure out what people actually want. And the other realization that designers had is they're not the best at this, right? So they started borrowing from other disciplines, like ethnography, like psychology, and so forth. And now why is that important, right? If you're designing any sort of solution for a user, you need to be able to put yourself in their shoes, right? And it's not easy, and the reason it's not easy is because we're all human, right? We're complex beings, right? We think something, we say something else, we feel something, we do something else entirely. And in India, maybe more so than in other countries. So you have to figure out, different tricks, different techniques to get that out. Yeah, so I won't go into those. It's a field on its own. It's actually a business school lecture on its own, so I won't go into that. But what you do is you take that, so you develop some sort of raw understanding of what I, as a user, what some user would potentially want in a final solution. And you sort of start defining that, right? You say, okay, this is what our understanding is of what this person actually wants. So what does the customer actually want? The rest of your organization, everybody will have their own understanding, even before asking a customer what the customer would actually want. But your goal is, you just talk to them, you just try to understand what drives them. Now let's take a guess at actually what they may actually want, yeah? So this is where you're defining it. Next, you take what you've learned, what you think the person wants, and start brainstorming, yeah? So let me give you an example, right? So if we're, let's go back to the iPhone, right? So let's say one thing that came out of that research is, that conversation with me, is that I want personalization. So then you think about, okay, how can I give this user personalization? And that's what this phase is all about. Yeah, there's some rules here, which every organization has its own rules. This I took, I think, from IDEO or one of their competitors. Then you get into prototyping. So by now, you sort of know what they want. You've developed a hypothesis. You brainstorm different ideas around it that, okay, this person wants personalization. These are the 50 ways I can deliver it. Now, instead of me going back and asking this person again at a theoretical level, let me make it real. Let me develop some prototypes that this person can actually react to, and that's what this is. And then you go out in the field and test it, right? Then you bring that back to me. You show me the 50 phones or the 50 features you've developed. I'll tell you which one of those actually work for me and which ones don't, right? So I'll tell you that, look, I know you worked hard, you came up with 50, but none of them work. I may say 2 work, I may say 50, all 50 work, combine it into a phone and give it to me, yeah? And that's what this last step is. And this step from testing to empathy is actually an iterative step. Right, so you go, so let's say you bring these 50 to me, I'll tell you, I like these 2, not these 48. You go back to the drawing board, you say, okay, why didn't he like these 48? Let's talk to him again, let's figure this out again. Let's figure out what these other features need to be, and you keep iterating until you sort of get to something that works for the user, yeah? And because this is user-led, because this is consumer-led, it tends to produce things which people actually want. Because I'm telling it to you, and not just telling it to you, I'm actually showing you that this is how I'd interact with it. This is how I'd work with it. And none of this is limited to physical products. So prior to IDEO, we launched a men's grooming salon, which I'll talk to you about in a second. We started testing that by actually building a store in the corner of a room like this, where we just brought people in just to figure out what they want. So we didn't go out and actually rent a space, build a store, build signage, advertise, no. We just built it in the corner. It took us 3 days to do it. We brought people in and let them interact with it. We learned more, so when we did launch, we launched 10 steps ahead of where we were. So this can actually be used for multiple things, multiple industries, in multiple ways. Yeah? Now, if you look at this process, empathy to testing, it actually sounds like common sense. Right? Obviously, right? If you're designing a new product, you will ask people what they want. you will try to give it to them. If they tell you they don't want that, then you change it and give them something they want, right? So it sounds like common sense. And you know, it is. Like, much like most theories that exist out there, at some level it is common sense. At some level, a lot of people do follow this. What makes it difficult is what I just previewed on the next slide is that it's actually difficult to do. We know it's good. We know it works. It's been shown to work over the last 40, 50 years. But much like a lot of other things out there that we know we should do, but we can't, this is just one of those things, yeah? That you know that this is the process you should follow, but it's very difficult to actually do it in practice. And that's why, you know, these famous names that you hear, the big names in innovation are the big names, right? Because they actually filter for certain behaviors and the type of people they bring in. They all have this process. It's open source. It's here. It's probably in your head. And what are those two behaviors? These are two behaviors. There can be, you know, a laundry list of these. These are two of my favorites. The first one is what's described as a beginner's mind. Yeah, you want to go into situations, I don't know how else to put it, not knowing too much about it, or at least pretending not to know too much about it. Yeah, now this worked in our favor when we were doing the men's grooming salon, because none of us had ever run a men's grooming salon. Yeah, it worked in our favor when we started this Arogia finance company, which was talked about earlier, because, you know, I personally didn't know anything about financing. Right, so it helps if you don't know anything about it, but if you do, then you still want to go in with no biases. Because you don't want to go in saying or thinking that, you know, I know this will work, I know this won't work. You may be right? But you're a sample size of one, and if you're designing something for the common world, for a larger population, it's better that you ask them what will work for them rather than assuming what will work for them. That's number one. A related one to that is humility. Yeah? Chances are you'll be wrong. Chances are when you show me those 50 prototype things that you guys came up with, most of them will be wrong, at least some of them will be wrong, at least one of them will be wrong. Right, so you need that ability, you need that just humility to be able to say, you know what, I'll go in, I'll test it, I may be wrong, but I can admit it. And this last one, honestly, is the reason why most companies fail at innovation. Most large companies fail at innovation. Right, because we develop these large structures, you know, you have an associate, you have a manager, senior manager, you have a director, you have a VP, SVP, and nobody wants to look like a fool in front of anybody else. So if you said that this is going to work, you know, you better make it work. You can't have that be proven wrong. And this is why, honestly, why startups end up doing a better job. Right? They're two friends who start most of these companies. Right? Take Google, take Microsoft. I don't know how many people started Microsoft. Right? Take a lot of these companies. There are 2 or 3 friends who are doing it all. Yeah? They're friends. Right? They drink together. They've embarrassed each other. So they can actually talk to each other and admit when they're wrong and build on each other. And they're not embarrassed by it. They can actually fix when they're wrong and, you know, come around to the right way of doing things. So in whatever experiences I've had, the process more or less stays the same. A lot of companies follow it, a lot of entrepreneurs follow it intuitively. A lot of companies follow it deliberately. But these are the two behaviors which I've seen which most often trip people up. And once you have this process, you know, where you start by understanding somebody, brainstorm what they might want, show it to them. If they like it, fine. If they're not, you change it. Common sense, right? It can be applied to a lot of things. It can be applied to phones, yes. Like I said earlier, it can actually be applied to experiences, right? And that's one of the first deviations that IDEO actually took in its history, is to say, yeah, we're developing some great products, great laptops, great phones, great et cetera. Can we do this for something else, right? So one of the first things they did is, let's say, they wanted to design the experience that you would feel when you walked into the lobby of a luxury hotel. And you know what? You can actually use the same approach because you're asking people what they want to see, what they want to feel, what they want to be able to touch and smell, and trying to give it to them. And as long as you can prototype it, you can actually go and change it and you know, design a better experience for them. Then they got into services, and they got into something called business design, which is designing new business models from the ground up. And that's usually the one people have most trouble with. So the one example I will go into slightly deeper is the business design example, just to make it more real for all of you. Yeah? Now this actually predates IDEO. We were still following the same approach at a different company. Predates IDEO for me, not IDEO as a company. This is the men's grooming salon that I talked about. So we had a simple goal. We're a profit-making entity. We wanted to make money. So we wanted to build a business which our strategic partner would either be able to push their products through or buy out, right? Our strategic partner was a company that has a very large portfolio in the men's grooming segment. We've all heard of it. Literally, we've all heard of it, yeah? So we said, okay, what do we do? So first we built that store in the corner of a big auditorium like this, learned what we could, and we said, that's still not real. People still don't feel right coming into a big auditorium because it's still pretend for them. So the first thing we did is actually took that store and we put it on the back of a truck. Because we said we want quantity of feedback here. We drove that truck around all over Bangalore, had people come in, gave them haircuts, shaving, this, that, just to learn more about what they want. That led to our first insight that exterior design had to be appealing to encourage people to come in. That's a very obvious insight, yeah? But I don't know why, but it took us sort of that experience to get that. So then we designed something that looked okay. People said that's still pretty ugly, so we designed the next iteration. People came in, they still gave us more feedback around how it could look better. But then we learned something else, is that once inside, the experience mattered more. That people wanted an affordable price, but for a lot of people who came in, especially to get a shave, it was a reward or an escape from their daily routine. So then we started optimizing for the experience. We said, okay, let's train the stylist, and these are the 10 things you'll talk to this person about. This is how it'll smell, this is what things on the wall would look like, this is the posters you want, this is the music you want. As we were doing that, so we went from here to there during that time, so we said, let's make it prettier even than it was. What we found out at that point is stylists cared more about their personal image than income. So during this 4.5 months until then, we'd actually gone through 15 stylists. One man shop, 15 stylists, right? Absolutely ridiculous turnover. What we found out is that stylists, they didn't care about income. We were paying them more. They didn't care about flow through. They didn't care about any of that. What they wanted is to be able to go back to their community and tell people, this is where I work. So when we talked to them, they said, I'd rather this be in a mall than on a street corner. And this thing was not going to fit in a mall. So we said, okay, we went back to the drawing board and then designed this thing, which then we launched in different malls across the country. Just a very quick example, that this is, again, it's using that same methodology, but it actually had not only product implications, it had service implications, it had business model implications, profitability implications, and for a lot of us, salary implications. Yeah, so a lot of implications from this one small thing. I'm going to skip this in the interest of time. I'm going to call Saurabh up here. This is yet another project this is something that we at IDEO did while I was there. I'll cover this if we have time at the end. So like we said, this can be applied to experiences, businesses. It can also be applied to user interfaces. And we thought this is a digital media conference. We should try to highlight user interfaces. And that's why we had Saurabh join us. His company, Human Factors International, is one of the authorities in this field. And he'll tell you more about what they do and take you through some examples as well.
Thank you, Dheeraj.
Sure.
Okay, can you hear me? Yep. All right, so Dheeraj talked about this process, and I've believed in this process for the last 10 years that I've been in this field. In fact, I believe that you can apply this process to solve almost any problem in the world. And I've really slept, breathed, dreamed design and user experience for the last 10 years I've been in the user experience field. So I want to talk a little bit about some fundamentals of design and designing for the digital medium. And I thought the best way to talk about these fundamentals is to talk about some of the misconceptions that I've seen people have about design over the last 10 years I've been in this field. And so I've listed 7 misconceptions in this presentation, and most of these I've accumulated by my experience working in India. So before I start the misconceptions, let me establish what is user experience, and when I say the word user experience, what am I really meaning? That's a very rudimentary definition of experience. But think about experience as the outcome of any design process. When you run a design process or apply it to anything, the outcome is the experience. We don't call it product. When you design for a digital medium or interactive medium, you call it user experience. I've heard people describe this term with other terms, which some of these are synonymous and some of these are not. Okay, and I'm going to tell you later on in the deck why some of these are not really synonymous. So people also call it customer experience. They call it human-computer interaction. Basically, how can we optimize the way a human communicates with a computer? also call it user-centered design because the process actively involves users. It's also called human factors. And some people also call it usability. That's not really synonymous. I'm going to talk about that later. So the first misconception is that user experience design is not important. It's all about the technology. I think most people don't have that misconception in this room. But I've seen this misconception over the last 10 years that I worked in this field. Well, UX is important. And if you do a search trend analysis of this term, user experience, on Google, you will see that interest in this term is peaking as of now. So you're seeing peak search volumes on Google for this term, user experience. And two terms are getting maximum interest: experience design and user experience design. And there are some related terms like UX jobs, UX designer, et cetera, which are breakout terms, which are experiencing more than 5,000% growth in search volume. So where is all this interest coming from? So the dark parts, the dark blue areas of this map is where the interest is coming from. So the US, Finland, India, South Korea, et cetera. So the interest is coming from where the technology or the software is coming from. And surprisingly, the city in the world that gets maximum searches for the term user experience is Bangalore. What does that mean? There's a lot of interest, okay? It means that user experience is now officially a buzzword, along with cloud, social, mobility, and big data. We heard a lot about all of those 4 trends since morning. So let me take some time to talk about the 5th big trend, at least according to me, which is user experience. So why did user experience become so important? I have to take you back 50 years, 50, 60 years, to where it all started. It all started in World War II. Some good things do come out of war. And a team of psychologists redesigned the cockpits of planes, fighter planes, and they came up with a Sacred 6 layout. It allowed pilots to focus on the 6 most important things when they're flying. So this made flying safer. It cut down training time and made training more efficient for pilots. Over time, user experience became really important for safety, especially in the healthcare industry. So when you design devices for health, you can't accidentally hit the wrong button or cut the wrong nerve or undo something, right? Error is not an option. The same thing would apply if you were designing the panel of a nuclear plant. You can't accidentally hit a button and cause a meltdown in a reactor, right? So user experience is really important in those cases. Over time, it also became important for productivity, right? So good design of software meant people were more productive. And Sun Microsystems estimated that people were wasting about 6 minutes each day trying to find stuff on their intranet, which was costing them a lot of money annually. A good way to know whether something is important is to see what the top companies of your era are saying about that. So I chose these 3. You might disagree. You might think that some other 3 should be here. But Apple, this is a quote from their head of design. We are absolutely consumed by trying to develop a solution that is very simple. We know, we are very familiar with Apple's philosophy around design. Google, they have 10 core principles. The number 1 principle is focus on the user and all else will follow. This is a quote from Jeff Bezos at Amazon. When things get complicated, we simplify them by asking what's best for the customer. So user experience is really critical today. And it's really become the core philosophy of all the top companies. Second misconception is that if you spend time doing user experience design in your software development lifecycle, it's going to be expensive. Let me dispel that. It's not expensive. In fact, it's free. Kind of a bold statement. I mean, my company charges for it, of course. But can you play the video, please? So I'd rather that you see the video than me talk about this. It's about 4.5 minutes.
User experience is the science and art of designing a product like a website or software application so that it's easy to use, so that it fits the expectation that the user has for it, and so that it meets business goals. There's a whole methodology around designing a user experience, and sometimes people ask me, is it worth it to do all that work to design a user experience? So let's talk about the return on investment, or ROI, of doing user experience work. IEEE is a professional organization that puts out reports and does research for programmers, developers, and engineers, and they put out an article called Why Software Fails. Here's some interesting data from the article. They estimate that the amount of money that is spent worldwide in information technology is estimated at $1 trillion a year. The percent of projects that are abandoned because they are hopelessly inadequate is up to 15% of all projects. The percent of revenue that goes to the IT group is 5% of a company's total revenue, and up to 10% if it's a financial or telecommunications company. The amount of time that programmers spend on rework that is actually avoidable is 50% of their time. The cost of fixing an error after development is 100 times that of fixing an error before development of the project is completed. Of the top 12 reasons that projects fail, 3 of the top 12 are directly related to what we would call user experience or user-centered design work. And those 3 are badly defined requirements, poor communication among customers, developers, and users, and stakeholder politics. So the kind of work that user experience professionals do, stakeholder interviews, user research, user testing, user-centered design, these are all things that can fix at least 3 of those 12 reasons why software fails. You actually can calculate the savings or additional revenue or benefit that you get from improving the user experience of a product. So let's look at some examples to make this more concrete. First example I want to talk about is, let's say that you are a micro-lending company. So these are often non-profit organizations that look for donations from people, and then they take that money and they lend it out in very small loans to people around the world who need the money to run a small or home business in order to better their situation. So you have a website and people donate money at your website, but the searching and donating part of the interface at the website is confusing and hard to use. And you have estimated that 50 customers a day are actually abandoning before donating because of the poor user experience. So let's do some calculations. Each customer, let's say, donates an average of $50 over the course of a year. So you are losing $2,500 a day, or $912,500 a year. If you spend $50,000 to fix the user experience issues, and another $50,000, let's say, to rewrite the code based on those user experience improvements, we can estimate you're going to spend $100,000 improving the user experience. It will take you 40 days or a little over a month then to realize the investment, because you've got $912,500 a year that you could improve. So in a little over a month, you've recouped your investment. There are many measurements that would be meaningful. For example, conversion rate. That's the number or the percent increase of visitors to a website who either buy or donate, or it doesn't have to do with money. It might be they take the action you want them to take, like register at the website. Or you might be interested in the decrease in the number or percent of drop-off or abandonment. The decrease in the number of calls to the help desk. Or maybe by making a user experience improvement, you can reduce the amount of training that's required. For instance, if it's an internal software application. Maybe you want to increase the usage of the software application. Maybe looking to save user time. Or maybe you want to save development time. Perhaps errors are what you are trying to reduce. Whatever measure you choose, calculating the return on investment is a way to show the value of doing user experience work. Here's one of my favorite quotes from Albert Einstein. I think he said it best. Any intelligent fool can make things bigger and more complex. It takes a touch of genius and a lot of courage to move in the opposite direction. If you'd like your own copy of this
Back to the
drawing
PowerPoint.
to download and print, go to humanfactors.com/ROI-poster.ASP.
Thank you. So we've, over the last 30 years that Human Factors has existed, we've demonstrated the ROI of doing user experience design in several cases. These are some examples. This is when we were working for an e-commerce company and we helped reduce drop-off by 73%, which had a big impact on revenues per month. This is where, for an intranet, the training was reduced from 8 hours per employee to 15 minutes. And of course, that led to cost savings. This is number of support calls per day, reduced that from 300 to 0. In fact, they thought the portal was down because there was nobody calling. And this is a recent one for an Indian client, a financial services company, revamping their digital channels for life insurance and mutual funds, increased leads by an amazing numbers, 179% for life insurance and 89% for mutual funds. So the cost of acquiring customers drastically went down. So that's why I said it's really free. It's not expensive because the ROI is huge. Misconception number 3, and this is something I've seen a lot in India especially, that design or user experience design is just about making something look good or pretty, right? And I'm sure those of you who are from the design field in the room, you've often got this brief from clients that says, I want wow. Just give me wow. And I'm here to tell you that design is not just about the way it looks, but also about the way it works. So it's not skin deep. So let me show you some examples, okay, about this misunderstood factor called wow. So this is Google. You've all seen this interface. Is this wow, visually? When you think about when somebody at Google was designing this interface before it was launched, and they went to the stakeholders and said, this is what I have, and stakeholders said, where is the wow? It has nothing. Where are the colors, and why is it empty? Right? So if you translate the wow as a visual wow, you will never end up like this. And if it didn't end up like this, you probably wouldn't have had Google as the #1 search engine in the world. So wow for Google is just about meeting business goals. If it meets business goals, it's wow. That's the best way of understanding what wow is. Let me give you another example. This is the most taken for granted software in the world. It's PowerPoint, okay? I'm using it right now. Is this wow? Visually, is it wow? Not really. But it's wow because it owns the 97% of the presentation software market in the world. Every 3 seconds, somebody's using PowerPoint in the world. That's wow. Okay? And that's the only wow we care about. Amazon. The interface itself visually is not wow. But it's wow because it works. I'm not saying that visual look and feel is not important. It is important and increasingly important, but I'm saying is only focusing on that is missing the big picture. And what's the big picture? The big picture about what it takes to do good user experience design is about a lot of things. It's about your underlying strategy and structure and the 4 pillars of design and the persuasion, emotion, and trust you build on top of that. Just focusing on visual design is like focusing on just one part of that picture. And this is a mistake I see companies making all the time. Just touching it up, changing the colors, and your design is good. That's not true. So here are some cases of before and after where we were able to take a more holistic view of UX and, of course, also make it look better. This is for a bank in Mexico. When you log into your bank account, it was like this, not very glance-friendly, not very visual, data is not very intelligently grouped, and you went from that to this. It looks better visually, but it was a lot more than that. This is for American Automobile Association. They wanted to increase membership. The membership page went from that to this, and when we did the eye tracking, we saw people were looking in the right areas. This is an Indian example. They had a very typical cannonball search interface. And actually here we were aiming for a more visual wow. We wanted to pull people in on the homepage itself. And this is for a company that makes mobile platforms. This is for self-care, which shows you your account usage, et cetera. Went from this to this. It was as much a visual revamp as much as it was a structural revamp. And the last one is this money management tool that we designed, which was about making finance less intimidating and allow people to manage finance in a way that was more convenient. This also won an award. Fourth misconception, user experience is equal to ease of use. Okay, we know today that's not true. It's not just about that. For discussion's sake, let me boil it down to three things: ease of use, engagement, and satisfaction. Okay? It's about these three things. And let's take some day-to-day objects around us and ask, what is the UX objective? This is the nail cutter. What is the UX objective here? Ease, engagement, or satisfaction? Can I get some responses? Ease, of course. You never cut your nails and say, I had a really satisfying experience. I wish I could cut nails all day. No, it's just about ease. If you leave the country, if you're at the international airport in India, you fill a form. It's called a departure form. What's the UX objective? Ease. You don't enjoy this. You just want to get rid of it. You want to finish it as soon as possible. So it's about making it as easy, as less painful as possible. ATM. Ease again. OK, but what about something like this? What's the UX objective? I'm getting a mixture of answers. Actually, if it was easy, you won't want to use it. So it's not about easy. It's actually about optimally difficult, and it's about engagement. There are so many things we do because they're not easy, right? Because they're difficult. Facebook, what's the UX objective? It's not that easy an answer, actually. It's a little bit maybe it's all of these three. Right? So what your UX objective is very contextual. Depends on the problem you're trying to solve. So you have to ask yourself, can the interface allow people to browse, search, consume, comprehend, interact, and will it engage, connect, persuade, convert, and make people return? Good UX is about all of those things. Fifth misconception, I'm almost at the end since there's 7. User experience design is just common sense. Well, actually it's not, because you have to understand the science behind how you design. So let me give you some examples of the science. And I'm going to give you some really simple examples. And it's about 2 kinds of science. One is the usability part. The other is called PET, which is persuasion, emotion, and trust. I'm going to give you examples of both. Usability. Okay, this is a kitchen stove. It has 4 burners and 4 knobs. Can you tell me which knob is for which burner? Any guesses? Yeah. This one? This one is for this one? This one is for this? And this one is? You may be right. You may be wrong. And what we're doing is we're guessing, right? And even if you are right, you'll have to remember that. So there is this fundamental scientific principle applied to the design of anything. It's called the WIM model. And WIM stands for visual, intellectual, memory, and motor. So when you look at something, you ask yourself, is the visual load higher than required? Is the intellectual load higher than required? Is the memory load higher than required? Or is the motor load higher than required? So if I look at this, I'm having to apply more intellectual or intellect than required to assess which knob is for which burner, and then I have to remember it, so there's memory load. So if I wanted to make this stove better, I have to reduce those two loads. How would I do that? Here's one example. Right? It's obvious which knob is for which burner, and I don't have to remember it. Of course, you would say you can't fit 2 pressure cookers there, but that's not the point. I'm trying to tell you that you have to reduce the 2 loads which are causing this to be unusable. And this basic scientific model you can apply to the design of anything. Cars, water bottles, kitchen stoves, websites, mobile phones, anything. That's the fundamental scientific model behind designing anything. You reduce those 4 loads. And these 4 map onto the 4 pillars of design. And there are best practices that tell us what not to do. For example, don't put red and blue together. That's a design best practice. Because if you do, you will get what is called the floating effect. The R's and the B's are floating. If you look at that for some time, you might get a headache. And that happens because red and blue focus on the extreme ends of the retina. And so you don't want to do this. Right? Here's another example. There's a myth that if it's something really important, you write it in all caps. Actually, that's a myth, because writing in all caps reduces reading speed by 20%. Because when we read, we're not looking at every letter, we're looking at a shape. And when you convert everything to all caps, every word is a rectangle. So it takes that much more time to differentiate between 2 words. So these are examples of the science behind design that you have to know before you do an optimal design. Now let's look at some examples around persuasion. It's a different part of the brain that deals with this. How do you persuade people to actually use something? There's a myth that if you want people to buy something, show them lots of choices. Okay, of course, that myth was dispelled by Sheena Iyengar, who showed that if you put 6 jams, 24 jams, what sells more? A stall of 6 jams versus a stall of 24 jams. Of course, you know which sells more because I'm making that point. Which sells more? How much more? How much more? 10 times more. So when we have more choice, we actually freeze up so much that we don't want to buy. We defer our buying. Let's take another example. This is the last one for persuasion. Here are 2 ads, and the only difference between the one on the top and the bottom is the eye. Which ad is better? Most people saying the top one? So let me show you the eye tracking data for this. Now tell me, which is better? Why is the bottom one better? You're actually seeing the product. Here you're only seeing the girl. Right? Why does this happen? So as humans, we're obsessed with processing faces. There's a part of the brain that just does that. And what on the face attracts most attention? The eyes. So wherever the eyes will follow, we will go. You could have a compromise. Kind of weird, but. 6th misconception. User experience design is user-created design. So you just go ask people what do you want, and you give them. Not true. How many people in the audience, and please be honest about this answer, how many people in the audience have bought a juicer? Juicer. Juicer, it takes out fruit juice and stuff. How many people have bought home gym equipment? Okay. How many people actually use these things? Why did you buy them? You thought you were going to use them. You're going to drink juice every day, be healthy, exercise on your treadmill. Well, you can't really believe people when they say they will use something, because they're a very bad judge of their own wants and needs. So famously, Henry Ford said, if I had asked people what they wanted, they would have said faster horses. So it's not just about giving people what they want. It's, like Dheeraj said, getting inside people's heads. So if you ask these 2 questions, these are the wrong 2 questions to ask. What do you want, and do you want this, yes or no? No. You need to ask other kind of questions that help you understand who the users are, and then derive the needs from there. The last misconception is a lot of companies think to have more of a design culture inside the company, all it takes is to hire a bunch of designers. It's like saying all it takes to have a good business school is a bunch of really smart professors. No, it takes a lot more. It takes an institute, it takes a building, it takes processes, it takes administration, content, all of that. And the same holds true for having good design mindset inside a company. You need a lot of things: executive championship, training, certification, central design team, rules, standards, and so on and so forth. In fact, we certify people in their design maturity. So on a scale of 1 to 5, we can certify where you are. So let me leave you with the 7 truths about design. UX is important. It's not expensive. There's huge ROI. It's a lot more than just making the interface look pretty. It's not always about ease of use. It takes serious UX training and expertise to do good UX design. It's not about what people want, but what they really need. And a mature design practice inside a company is a lot more than just designers. It's governance, executive championship, standards, and tools. So I'll stop here and invite Dheeraj up on stage and take any questions.
Yeah, I don't know how much time we have. I think you have to get ready for the next speaker.
Just a couple?
Yeah?
Okay.
All right, so 2 questions? Not everybody at once.
Yes.
Is somebody back there?
Back.
Hi, my name is Dhruv. You used a statement when you said do not use caps when you're making a UX design. Do you think that's too much of a generalization? Where I'm getting at is if you look at brands that are designed to be very premium, let's say a single mod like a Glenlivet, over there they purposefully use caps to give a tone of voice that is authoritative, a tone of voice that is that stands for, we know what we're talking about, and we're coming from a point of view where the brand is talking from a position of authority. It's not a great position to be taking for a lot of brands, but do you think there are segments in which this all caps may not hold true?
Sure. Dheeraj, can I take that?
Go.
So of course it applies to running text, not to labels or headlines. Right? So if you're writing a paragraph of text, don't use all caps or italics because they will mess with the shape. If you're writing a label in all caps, it's okay. It's going to really not impact reading speed as much. Yeah? So yes, different situations, slightly different implication. Yes?
Should I ask? Hello. Hi. Hi, I'm Jayanti. So if you have a product which is inherently flawed when it comes to design and look, and the user interface is basically not particularly appealing, but there is resistance from the users because of the loyalty factor. Say, for example, they've been using it for the last 5-10 years, and they resist the change. What do you do then? Because the users like the product, even though it's flawed. But how do you go about that?
Honestly, then it's not flawed. Right?
Then,
I mean, if the users are telling you that they're using it, they like it, then it's actually working for them. You might be able to evolve it with their help, but my initial reaction would be it's probably not flawed then. I mean, I think anyway, right? I mean, unless you're really talking at this segment of the market and you want to go after the 99% who are not using it and they're telling you something different. If your entire user base is telling you they love it, they love it.
Which it could be, right? I mean, if probably with a few design tweaks or something, it could reach out to a wider audience. Like you said, the users really don't know what they want. So the idea is to get inside the user's head. But in a situation like this, what is it that you do? You leave it as it is it?
No, I mean, it's if I was you. So first of all, this whole thing about users don't know what they want. People say it because it's it's provocative. It's probably not true. That said, I mean, if I was you, what I would do is actually just do what we just said. Just take a look at what segment of the population you're able to serve right now, talk to some non-consumers to see what it would take them to convert to users, and then make the call sort of based on that. And you may even want to have two versions at the same time of the same product, just for different people. If, maybe that's the way forward. Maybe that's the right approach.
To add to what Dheeraj said, I would answer that question objectively. So if people said, I love it, versus if people said, I hate it, I won't believe either way. I will actually see them perform tasks on my application to see what is actually true. So some users will always tell you, this is easy, I love it, but when you actually make them perform tasks on it, you'll find a completely different story. So you have to answer that question objectively before you decide to change something.
Yeah, because inertia has a big role to play,
Of course,
right?
people hate change.
Yeah.
People hate change, so before you make the change, you have to get an objective answer on is it really working or is it broken?
Thank you.
Hi,
Yes.
that was a very insightful presentation. Thank you. I come from a B2B setup, so we mostly use email marketing and microsites where UX is really important because you're trying to get the customer's attention. But correct me if I'm wrong. In a B2B kind of decision-making process, it's a high involvement and completely need-based decision-making. So is UX less important? Because ultimately he's going to go back into an organizational buying process and take a decision based on budgets, needs, and it's going to be a very high involvement purchase which is process driven. So is UX as important?
UX is as important, but the way you approach it is slightly different. Okay. The business goals there are different. Like I said, the UX objective in a B2B case might be completely different from what it is in a B2C, and it is contextual, right? In a B2B, the UX, you might be addressing your customer's customer, not necessarily your immediate customer. So the rules are slightly different.
Yeah.
Thanks.
Yep.
Hi. Being a user experience designer, I wanted to know that in the West, in US and other countries, UX is really accepted and advanced. Do you see Indian market also accepting it in the same pace? Or?
Yeah, 10 years ago, I had to spell that word when I used to go to companies. I used to say USER, and it was really difficult. But today, actually, for most people, I don't have to explain what it is. But there are misconceptions. So they know they want it, but they have different ideas about how to go do about it. So I think there's a huge difference in the way it was, and so I'm very hopeful about the future.
Okay, we'll probably have to close there. We can take some more questions offline if you guys are around. Thank you so much, and we have a token of appreciation.
Thank you.
May I request Professor Mehra to give away a token of thanks? Thank you, Dheeraj. Thank you, Saurabh.